Steak Bites, where we carve out space for meaningful conversations that go beyond the grill. I'm your host, Kara Smith, and fellow enthusiasts of all things tasteful and fulfilling. Today, we're joined by Alison Capra, wellness expert, coach, entrepreneur, and author of the boldly titled How Not to Be a Miserable Cow. Alison's insights into wellness and nutrition go far beyond surface level advice, focusing on empowering others to lead intentional, balanced lives. Her journey from a passionate advocate of the real food movement to building a thriving personal brand while balancing motherhood and entrepreneurship is packed with lessons and practical wisdom. Through her book and social platforms, Alison inspires countless people to take ownership of their health, embrace authentic living, and find joy in the process. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you so much. I love that intro. I want you to send it to me so I can put it on my website.
There you go. We'll make sure you get it. So, but we do appreciate you hopping on. I know we talked even before we got on recording about just some of the thought processes as we're closing out Q4. And we also, of course, from a lot of perspectives, are looking at new beginnings of 2025. But also we're looking at a new administration. We're looking at a lot of things that I think can be exciting for looking at the new year and kind of starting things off right. So what would you tell our listeners as you're looking at, closing out a year and then looking at, I guess we could call it starting fresh in 2025. That's a lot of those New Year's resolutions, right? Is, hey, what are we going to do different in 2025?
Yeah, man. Oh, man. Well, it's exciting because I'm actually going to be 40 in January. So as soon as we cross the over, I'm crossing over. And I'm pretty excited about it because truthfully, for me at 40 years old, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in my life. I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life. And I'm doing more that I love than I ever have in my whole life. So it's like, it took me a while to get here, but I'm definitely stoked because I think that at any age, you can choose to change the course of your life just based off of your decisions, right? Your decisions that you make each and every day. And it's not as much as like New Year's resolutions are refreshing in the sense that it's like everyone kind of gets like this fresh start. The truth is like, I try to look at almost every single day like that. Like, okay, I messed up yesterday, but how can I improve today? What can I do better? Can I drink more water? Can that be the thing that I do today? But really my journey with like personal development, I started at very young age, but I don't think there's a lot of personal stuff that I needed to overcome just from like my early 20s that I just hadn't dealt with. And so it really wasn't until I was like in my mid 30s that I decided, hey, I want to change my life. Like I need to fix this. Like I wasn't on a good track with my health. I was overweight. I was dealing with a lot of just like stress factors from, work and everything like that, but really just not really feeling like I was myself. I felt like the person who I saw myself as wasn't who I saw in the mirror and wasn't who I was portraying in life. Like what I felt like in my heart, it wasn't who I was. I was this person that was super unhealthy and overweight, and it's not how I felt inside. I didn't understand. And so I really decided to dive in and develop myself. I got my, prenatal and postpartum fitness certification. And then I got my nutrition certification so I could like understand better the things that I was missing. Mm-hmm. And I think you can do that at any age. So I think moving forward to 2025, it being like one of those like, 2025, it's a great number. It's a nice round number to look at, right? Because like I said, I was born in 85, so I'm going to be 40 this year, right? So anybody who's born on one of those like 85, 25, whatever, it's like we're kind of getting this big production year. And I feel like it's the perfect time to get a hold of what it is you want out of life. What are you going to set your intentions for? And that's kind of exciting.
That is exciting. And I love that thought process that it's like, why wait till the new year, right? Why wait for literally anything? But I do hear that a lot from, people that inspire me, yourself included, of like, there's no better time than the present, right? To take a hold of whatever that may be, whether it's health, whether it's wellness, whether it's your fitness journey. You roll jiu-jitsu. You're a purple belt, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Just got
awesome.
my purple belt in June.
Yeah, which
So I still feel
is,
like I'm a baby purple belt, but yeah.
well, I'm a baby white belt. I don't really know anything, but show up anyways. So, but just that was a journey for me, which I think a lot of women can relate on so many levels that have taken up jujitsu. And I've heard you speak about it too, as far as motherhood and some of that, how that changed your life. And I have a very similar story. That's why I started in jujitsu, because I was holding a 6-month-old baby, and I was like, what if something happened? I
Yeah.
feel well because first off, I've generally been in pretty good shape my most of my life in general, not even my adult life, but most of my life. I've been very active, all the things. I was focused on protein, etc. All the things everybody tells you to do: drink more water, etc. But after pregnancy and then having a child, that was the weakest I've ever felt in my life. And that was an eye-opening thing of, what if something happened? How am I going to protect this baby? And that's what got me into
Yeah.
jujitsu. So,
I know. And when people tell me, and that's the thing, it's like, I'm not trying to be mean. Everybody has got their thing. They can do whatever they want to do. But people tell me sort of like, oh, it's just fighting isn't my thing and jujitsu is my thing. And I'm like, I can get that. Okay. But getting attacked in a parking lot's not my thing,
right.
but it could still happen. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it does. And it's wild, isn't it? How like these crazy like instincts kick in when you have your kid. You're like, oh my God, like I will kill somebody if they get too close to my baby right now. Like you just have this like intense, like, and I remember feeling that way. And same as you, I was like, I feel like so sloppy and like I can't do nothing. If somebody were to come at me right now, I feel like I couldn't even run fast enough to get away. I have to get it together. And so that really was it. That's why I started jiu-jitsu. And of course I fell in love with it. But I think it's probably one of those things, like, even if you don't want to do jujitsu, if you don't love like rolling around with sweaty people and getting like wrestling for your life on the ground, that I get, but it's still, at least, get yourself into a self-defense course or something so that you are prepared if anything is to happen to you and your kids are in tow, because it's a totally different deal of you just running versus when your kids are present. You can't just always take off running if somebody grabs a hold of your kid.
Yep.
And that's one thing we talk about. So actually just about a month ago, they asked me and another female at our gym to take over the female ladies program at our jiu-jitsu gym. And so we're working with all the mostly white belts and blue belt beginners that are kind of just like getting started on their journey, females, obviously all females. And it's so cool because we're getting to talk about that kind of stuff, because obviously it's something that we're all a little afraid of, right? It's all something in the back of our minds at all times. And so just listening to other women just kind of share that same sentiment, like, what about this? What about if this happened? And it's exciting because the other woman that I work with in the program is a female cop as well. So she's just got a lot of experience with all those different things. I mean, she's had to take out, she's had to take people out. So it's like, it really just, it's cool to have a community of women supporting each other in those kind of endeavors, like in our late 30s. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think that community piece is something that we could talk about in depth. That was especially when my husband and I entered into the jiu-jitsu community, of how much of an impact that has when you have that kind of community behind you. But I would say I'd love to hear your thoughts on, not only that within that community, but also other communities, especially when you're trying to reach your goals from a health perspective, or, whatever, even business perspective. I know you could speak to that as well. Motherhood, like having that community and that support around you, like how important that is, or ways that our listeners can find that too. I think that's also something to consider. Thankfully, we're as connected as we ever have been. But I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
So, we kind of talked about it. I wrote a book called How Not to Be a Miserable Cow. And a lot of it was me kind of going through a stage in my early 30s of trying to kind of figure out who I was again, because I'd partied so much in my 20s. I just kind of like drifted into drifted into my 30s. And so I didn't really know what it is that I wanted to do. And there's a lot of things I was still learning about who I was. And so I was really dealing with a lot of frustration. And I wrote the book because, you know, it's like there are a lot of things that kind of make us miserable, and they have a lot to do with what's between our ears, right? Like the things that we're meditating on, our perspective in life, who we're surrounding ourselves with, what we put in our bodies. Like there's so much to it. And so I kind of had to take like a pretty big look at why I was miserable, and and honestly take away anyone else from the equation. No one else was my problem. What was the problem? Because it wasn't anyone else, right? So I kept like, wherever you go, there you are. I was like running from a lot, and I kind of had it all catch up with me, and I had to go, why am I miserable? What are the things that are making me miserable? How do I get past this? And so one of the things that I found for myself to help me get past that sense of misery and to really figure out what it was that I wanted for my life was I had to, because I moved to a new state, I started a new career. I didn't have anyone in my life that I knew, like it's all new people, because I was running from my past. So it was like, now here I am, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought, you know what, I have got to put myself out there, and I've got to try things. And that sounds kind of simple, but a lot of women, whether it's because you are running from your past, or it's because you feel like you're stuck because you put yourself on the back burner and take care of everyone else in your life first, and you quit taking care of like you and who you are, you start to become bitter, become miserable, feel frustrated, feel stuck, you know, all these things. And sometimes just putting yourself out there and trying something new can be simple as it is to just getting you over a hump of like fitting into a community. So for a while, you know, we went rock climbing. That was kind of a big thing for my husband and I. We spent a few years really just like diving in hard on rock climbing. We were at the gym every week at the rock climbing gym. And then we would go like every quarter on a rock climbing trip, and really, we loved it. But you know, that's like that community is what it is. It was kind of a long drive, and then COVID hit. That kind of like, you know, mixed some things up, and we couldn't use our rock climbing gym, was closed forever and stuff like that. You know, I was in the fitness community. I was trained all the time, so I kind of just jumping around gyms to find one that I felt like I fit in. And so sometimes just putting yourself out there and trying something new and overcoming the stress, anxiety, or fears of meeting new people can really help, right? So that was it. I started to say, okay, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to try jiu-jitsu. I'm going to put myself out here. I'm going to meet a bunch of people that I don't know. And at the time at our gym, there was like 2 females. So it was like, I had no idea what to do. You know, it's like you walk in a gym and you're just like, oh my God. And I remember I got like destroyed. And I was laying on my stomach flat on the mat, like in prone position, and just somebody was on my back just choking the shit out of me. I was just like, oh my God, this is like literally could not be any worse position. And I left, and I remember thinking like, that was really fun. And it was so cool because I started to realize like that was something that I enjoyed. And not only that, but it was something that I was falling in love with. And then this community that was involved in jiu-jitsu was small, but it was growing. So I started inviting people, inviting friends. And before long, though, they stood up a ladies program. And then we had, you know, 6 women coming or 7 women coming, you know, and it was like very small at first, but it just grew and grew and grew. And I think, you know, people think like you need to go sign up for a gym that's full of women, but sometimes you just need to start going and bringing a friend, and you will build the community, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's super important, especially if you are a person who's like a community-hearted, community-driven person, to put yourself out there and just try something new. Just try.
Yeah. That 2 things in that building your community kind of where you are. I love that. That's something that's been pretty near and dear to my heart because I've been a lot of different places. I've lived in different parts of the country. I've traveled a lot of the country. And now I'm back at, our original homestead, the ranch that's in the middle of nowhere, because that's where you run cattle, right?
Yeah.
But I have always been like, felt like I would like to have, especially that community of women around me. So I was like, I guess I'm going to create it here because that's where we are. And so I love that thought process of being able to create your own community and kind of be the change that you want to see in the world, which is, I don't know if you could ask for more, right? To be able to go out and do that. And then as you, because your son, he's pretty close to the same age as my oldest daughter, correct?
He's 4.
Yep. Okay. So kind of in between. So my oldest daughter, she just turned 5, and my youngest daughter, she's 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So that I continually am reminded of that every day in motherhood of how do I continue to help them be what I would like to see, that of like creating ways for them to go do hard things every day. So they realize that they can do hard things. That it's like that mental reinforcement of that is such
Oh
a
my God,
valid
yes.
thing. Yeah, just being able to create that. And that's part of the reason that we moved back to the ranch, frankly. I didn't know how to create some of those experiences that were going to help shape my children's lives without them being responsible for another life. Or, I mean, there's things that
Right.
they are exposed to here, and some of the things, frankly, you're exposed to in jiu-jitsu, and that is kind of like, well, life or death, shut off the
Yeah.
blood supply to your brain. That's a
Yeah.
big deal. Or if you don't go take care of your cattle every day, they aren't going to live. They rely on you for that life. I think those two things are pretty cool to dive into.
It's so true. And that's so cool that you're like, you see that so early. Cause I think that's one of the things that I didn't, I think a lot of the reason why I lacked self-confidence, in my 20s is because I didn't understand discipline and I didn't understand doing hard things, right? Like I thought like, I mean, I liked doing hard workouts. I did CrossFit all through my 20s and stuff like that. But I don't think I understood that like discipline was my friend. To me, I just wanted to feel good and have fun and be comfortable. And so that's what I did. And all that does is make you like absolutely loathe yourself in the end. Like if you're just sitting around on your butt, like, a turd, and all you care about is like, what's the next place I'm going to go drink with my friends? What's the next place I'm going to go party? Like whatever it may be, that's your comfort zone at that time in your life. There's no satiating that. There's no satiating the level of comfort. There's no satiating like the level of feel good and the feel good pleasure button. There's no satiating that. And so ultimately it took me doing hard things, going through what I went through, doing hard things, overcoming adversity, and then becoming extremely disciplined that made me have confidence in myself, that made me go, oh, I'm not just a good time party girl. I'm actually very good at a lot of stuff. I'm actually like very strong and very disciplined, and I can do really big things.
Yeah.
And I think now it's so hard, right? When you're dealing with toddlers and small age kids, because they just want to be comfortable, and they just want you to hold them, and they just want to cuddle, and so everything's about like immediate gratification, and they just want to feel good. And you're like, in some respects, you're like, oh, you want to make them feel good and squeeze them and cuddle them. But then you're like, that ultimately will make them so not like themselves in the future. Like they will never see themselves as brave. They'll never see themselves as like hardworking or dedicated or somebody that can do anything. They'll always think, oh, this is hard. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
It does. And that's something, and it's not only from a female perspective, but that's something that a lot of times that can be wrestled with from that perspective. And that's something that I think we both have wrestled with, and a lot of women have. And that is always forefront of my mind of how to instill that in my girls. Wouldn't be any different if I had boys, but how to instill that in my girls. And I know we keep coming back to jiu-jitsu, but that is the one other thing that I've found that I'm like, oh man, that's a way to do that, right? Like if they if they've actually seen that kind of adversity of like, hey, I either need to do something or somebody's going to choke me. I mean, that's kind of there's real life consequences to that, right?
Yeah.
And both of them they actually really enjoy it too. You know, the more they get to do that and the more they get to feel empowered, they get that mindset continued to be re-ingrained, the more that happens. And I think that's something we could talk about, Alison, for listeners in general of, you know, we're talking kind of health, wellness, fitness, as you mentioned, that discipline, just reinforcing that mindset of kind of you can do hard things. And even we can talk about food. I think that's another one that a lot of times is a very mental thing, whether it's true kind of addiction with a lot of sugar or it's just that reinforcement. Actually, I talked to Anne Montgomery last week with First In, and she's like, that's what it was with me. It was just like that mental reinforcement of you had a bad day, you celebrate with food, or you drown your sorrows in food. Yeah. Or you have a good day, you celebrate with food. So some of that mental side of it, I think is something that we could really dive into.
Oh yeah. Well, so I think that's another thing, you know, as like growing up and everything, like I grew up in the Midwest. And so there wasn't a lot to do, like, especially where I was at, besides like in the winter anyways, people just ate and drank. Like that's kind of what you do. Like even now when I go home, it's challenging for me to visit because it's like there's not a ton. I mean, in the Midwest, like here, for instance, we have the beach, you know, and then if you go a few hours, there's the mountains. And so it's like we can go hiking, we can go, you know, go surfing, we can go paddleboarding, we can do all this stuff. But really like outdoor stuff in the winter in the Midwest is like brutal. And so it's, and we don't have mountains either. So it's like, you know, we really we couldn't snowboard, we couldn't do any of that stuff. So it's like growing up, it really was challenging in the sense that like seasonally, there's a lot of people who struggle with seasonal depression and things like that. And I really do think that was something that I really did struggle with as I got older, because I was just like, I love to be outside. And it's just so flipping cold there. You know, we would just have snow days constantly. And I would just like kind of in the winter pack on like 15, 20 pounds like every year, because it was like we would just be drinking beer and making chili and eating chips and salsa and hanging out all evening. And like you just don't move as much, you know. So it's like that whole like cycle of, you know, doing that when you're in your teens, it's not a big deal. When you're in your 20s, it's like, and then as you start to move into your 30s, it's like you're holding 30, 40 pounds of body fat that you don't need, you know? And I think that that's one of those things about like the comfort that kind of comes there. And so I do think like it can be as small as that, like a seasonal thing that's a depression for people, or it could be something much deeper, like stems from their childhood, stems from family stuff. They're using food as substance, like whatever it may be. I think if it's just a lack of knowledge, I think that there's something that you can obviously just dive right in and start researching. And I think that really was one of the things that I wanted to understand very early. And so I studied something called the blood type diet. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. A lot of people are like, the science behind it, people sometimes don't agree with. So it's kind of all over the place. So I early on did something where I was like, probably in my 20s, and I was like, I'm going to try all the things that it says that in my blood type, I should avoid these foods. And I'm going to take each one out for like 2 weeks, and then I'm going to put it back in and kind of see if the things that it said for me are accurate. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I felt like it was all pretty accurate because I'm blood type O. And so it said like, I really need to eat red meat because it says that we produce more stomach acid than any other blood type. And if you're not giving your stomach something to break down, it gives you a lot of acid like that kind of builds up. And so blood type O people typically have the most ulcers. So giving yourself red meat every day, eating a lot of like a very high protein diet, really limiting any kind of like processed sugars, any processed carbohydrates. It's like not having wheat that's not sprouted all the way, you know, things like that. Like there's just a lot of little things that have changed so much with our food that cause so many like allergic reactions that we're not even aware of, right? So like for me, one of the big things that I try to avoid is like wheat that isn't sprouted. I do sprouted grains all the time, but if it's not a sprouted grain, then I'm really going to stay away from it. And then I would say for the most part, I'm borderline carnivore because I just eat so much meat and eggs, you know, and even cheeses like mozzarella, feta, things like that, goat's cheese, things like that. But I just, for the most part, try to avoid processed food altogether and stick to like the outside aisles, like they say in the grocery store, right? Where are all your veggies? And I do eat a lot of fruit and vegetables. That's like probably my number one carbs, fruit and veggies. And so, you know, for me, like that makes my body a machine that can fuel itself like so efficiently to where, you know, I'm now almost 40. I am about probably right now 14-15% body fat. And I like compete in jiu-jitsu. So I run between 130 and 140, depending on if I'm doing a comp or not. Right. And that's crazy because when I started jiu-jitsu, I weighed 170 pounds and I'm 5'4". So like that was a lot for me. Right. And so I always had a lot of muscle on my body because like I said, I did CrossFit all the time. I've been weightlifting since I was 16. So I'd always done weightlifting and I'd always like understood that I needed to eat high protein, but I didn't understand that the macronutrient breakdown of like fat and carbs through the roof and then high protein it's still not good. If you just eat high protein and then just eat a ton of everything else as well, you're still going to be overweight, right? So I had to understand about calculating my macros, and that took me a little while to get that piece down. But I think truthfully, what was harder was overcoming my own like triggers for food. Like when I'm feeling and alcohol really ultimately, because, you know, I'll have a glass of wine here and there, but I used to drink wine like every night, like drink, you know, beer all the time, like going out for dinner. Oh, let's have a couple beers as well. You know, so you're just popping calories on top of calories on top of calories. And not to mention all like the beer was just like destroying my guts. Like I was just like, oh, it was horrible. So getting a hold of those things that I was like, why am I going to alcohol? Why am I going to food? And dealing with that piece here. And then being able to like understand, like, because the information is like out there, like it's all over the internet. You could get on ChatGPT and ask for a meal plan for yourself that's high protein. And you could say, I want to avoid these food items. Help me make a meal program. And it'll give you a meal program for like 60 days. So the information's there. We all have access to it. It's at our fingertips. We just have to deal with this, right?
Yep. So what's your practice, like let's say 3 tips you could say to our listeners with knowing these things about food, etc. What would you say? You know, some of that practical advice, take home, implement this.
I honestly, for women in like their 30s and 40s and 50s, I mean 60s really, but as once you get past 35, like the number one thing I can tell people is like I totally misunderstood like a macronutrient breakdown. So if you could just understand your own macros and like even get on ChatGPT or a website where you can do like a macronutrient calculator and you can just start tracking your own food, whether you use MyFitnessPal or you use Chronometer. There's all these apps now where you can keep track of what you're eating. But let's just say for the sake of it, like you don't have time for that. You are like, you know, that's a lot. Just monitoring and making sure you're getting like at least 120 grams of protein a day, of course, relative to your body type. If you could just eat the protein that you need so that you can sustain muscle, that's number one. Like you just got to get the protein in. Like, I don't care what anybody says, like you have to, because it's the only thing that's going to stop you from like aging quicker than you want to. like, and keep you where you can not only just look good, but feel good, and keep yourself from getting issues with disease and all these different things. So if you can get 120 grams of protein a day, that's like, just freaking do it. And honestly, I do 200 grams a day. So I know people act like they can't get 120. I'm like, bro, I promise you can. I do 200. It's there. You can do it. I'm 5'4", not even 5'5" all the way. And I'm like 130 pounds, and I can eat 200 grams of protein a day. And then second, I think a lot of women have this like cardio trap in their brain. Like, I just need to go run, or I need to go walk for 15 minutes, or yes, walking is awesome. Cardio is cool. But truthfully, if you could strength train 3 days a week, even, strength training will help you to, like, the muscle is what's going to help you keep the fat off. Because if you keep doing crash diets and cardio all the time, like, you are not ever going to sustain muscle, and ultimately the fat will always come back. So like, that was kind of my thing in the past, was like, I would just crash diet and do hard cardio like all the time, so that I could like try to keep the fat off, but I wasn't allowing myself to grow muscle because I was just like not eating enough protein, and I was burning the engines all the time. And so I looked sloppy because I just wasn't growing and sustaining muscle. So if you can just eat protein, lift weights 3 days a week, and then ultimately, I truthfully just believe like one of the number one issues for women is getting enough sleep. Like, it's like the curse, right? Like, we're the ones, the kids want it in the middle of the night. We're the ones that like miss the sleep all through the breastfeeding. We're like, we do. So it's like, you got to make it a priority. It has to be a priority. Like, you have to put your phone down. Like, last night I was like, I had one of the worst days ever yesterday, and I was just like up, and I'm like, I got to go to bed. I got to go to bed. And I'm laying in bed staring at the ceiling like, oh, I just want to go look at my phone. Yeah. But like, if I did that, I would never go to sleep. Like, because my brain would start moving, and like the light on your eye is like, you've got to put your phone away. You've got to prep the room. You've got to get yourself, whatever it has to be. If you got to get your kids to bed earlier, you got to get enough sleep, because ultimately your hormones will never get you where you want to be if you're not getting enough sleep.
Yeah, for sure. I never experienced that until I had kids.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how important it was, because I had always prioritized sleep, and then all of a sudden I couldn't. That was a life-changing endeavor.
But my husband tells me all the time, and he's like, you are like non-functional without sleep. Like, I turn into like a giant baby. I'm like, like emotional, and I'm not an emotional person in that way. Like, I don't cry at the drop of a hat or anything. But if I do not get sleep, I'm just like trash. And he's like one of those people, because he's in the military and everything, and they were like, they'd go days and he could just like go. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm a basket case without it.
My husband's the same way. I'm like, I don't, he's like, he got a solid 4 hours. He's like, I'm good to go. And I'm like, I am not. So Alison, we talked about protein in general. And I do feel like this is one of those stigmas, particularly with women and red meat. Could you shed some light on that, or give some your own personal thoughts around red meat in general? Because that has become kind of under fire, particularly with women on the red meat topic.
Yeah, man. Okay. So, I mean, here's the biggest thing. There's so many, this is what's hard, is like, there's just so much information out there on all these different things, right? Over the years, I've tried just about every different way of eating. Lifestyle dieting, I've tried, where I did like paleo. I tried where I did more stuff, high carb. I even did vegan for a little bit. I've tried just about every kind of lifestyle diet. Here's the thing. The only way that my body functions efficiently is whenever I'm dealing with all those. Well, I mean, the only way I can explain this is like, within your protein, right? You have, let's say you pulled out a container of protein. And that's like, you're going to do a protein shake. I just wish there was like a giant label for steak every time you pulled it out, so you could understand like what you're getting when you put meat in your system. Cause it's literally just like lean fuel for every muscle in your body. Like between the, you know, the aminos, between the protein, between the actual, I'm trying to give you like a better picture of it that I could like spell it out. I'm just even the creatine. I mean, the thing that you can't understand is like they're creating proteins from plants to be more like meat.
Yeah.
It's like they're creating something
definitely that big one.
to give you all of what you need in meat. Like, why not just go to the meat?
Right.
Like same thing with like the eggs. It's like we're creating things to take the place of an egg. Well, why not just go to the single source ingredient and eat it? And then like you'll have not only the protein, but you'll also have everything that goes along with it to keep your body and your system exactly the way that it was intended to be, right?
Sure.
So for me, I would say I probably do in one setting. But if I'm not going to do, like, I'll do 8 ounces of fish, I'll probably do 8 ounces of steak as well. And I'll find lean ground beef. I'll find lean steak because like, maybe I don't want to do a super high fatty steak. And I cannot explain to you the difference in the way my body looks on the different kinds of protein. So it wasn't until I got extremely lean that I could see these major, major differences in my body. When I eat like borderline carnivore and I'm eating like fruit, veggies, meat, you know, a little bit of dairy. I try not to do a lot of like milk just because for me personally, like I get a lot of like stuffed up and stuff when I do too much milk. So I try not to do a lot of milk, but just even like a little bit of yogurt. I do a lot of Greek yogurt, stuff like that. I will look like shredded. Like I can post a photo of me just like doing my normal, like healthy dieting and all that stuff and just show like how that looks. And then if I show you a photo of myself 2 weeks later, eating a lot more processed foods and things like protein shakes, just because I've been busy and I'm traveling and I like am like just throwing protein in my mouth because I gotta go. It's 2 weeks apart. And it'll look completely different. And it can even just be like my gut, like my stomach, the way that it changes because of all this. And honestly, there's probably ingredients in the proteins and stuff that I shouldn't be eating that are just like additives, you know, and that they affect my gut lining. And so it is like I will have a bloat sitting on my stomach because, you know, like adipose tissue, our fatty tissues in our body are the most inflammatory. So wherever you hold or have held in the past the most fat, that tissue becomes the most inflamed whenever anything changes. So let's say you travel, that's where you're going to bloat. Let's say you have like been overtraining and your body's like just wrecked, you're going to bloat wherever you've held the most fat, right? Mm-hmm. So typically for me, you know, just being overweight in the past and then having a kid, I'll hold a lot of like bloat in my stomach. And so when you get really lean, you can see bloat like that. I can eat one bad thing and I'll see it like that. And I think that's really kind of cool because you can start to kind of like break down, okay, so what is the item that is actually causing this, right? And start trying to take things out and put them back in. And so I noticed for a while that I would be like just shredded looking, and then I'd eat something and I'd look bloated. And I'm like, what did I eat? What was it? What was in there that did this to me? Right. And so the only thing that I can tell you from like, you know, a finite point is that when I am doing those lean, like grass-fed beef, you know, eating really like clean meats and things like that, clean vegetables, fruits, taking care of like even sprouted grains, whatever it may be, I look awesome. When I am not, it is like within an hour, you can see the difference. So if that helps you in any way.
I think that's really solid insight, you know, because you you're to the point that you have measured it, you can see it, you can, you have the anecdotal side of it to be like, I know what this does to me. And as you mentioned, even with blood type, all the other things, it can be very different for different people, which is
Right.
which is fair, and that's great. That I also did appreciate the comment about, we're trying to recreate all of the benefits of these whole foods.
Right.
Like, let's just go back to the whole foods, right?
Right.
And my own personal experience with it, I obviously grew up eating a lot of red meat because I'm a fifth generation rancher's daughter. That's what we do. We eat beef.
Yeah.
But I also realized when I went to college and had all of these access to other foods that I had not had before, especially at that level, how that impacted me. It impacted my mental clarity, not only, my body and how it was fueled and how I showed up every day. And that's where especially as you mentioned, now you get over 35, I see it that much more, because in my 20s, I could literally eat whatever I wanted.
Right.
In theory, it didn't impact me, but I also wasn't as intentional and had the mindset around, how is this really impacting me? Am I really showing up the way that I would like to show up? And when I look at it now, I wasn't. So I think the more people can have that mindset of like, how does this impact me? How am I showing up in life? Like, what am I fueling my body with? Not only food, but community, people, all of the things that impact how you show up every day. I think that's a very solid thing to consider.
And then, like, if we're not even talking about aesthetics, because, like, obviously, like, that's one piece of it. But ultimately, if we're talking about like the way that you feel and how you fuel, I mean, you can't get more, I really feel like there is not really anything more like intense training wise than jiu-jitsu. I mean, there's not really any sport. I mean, there probably is, who knows, but there's very few sports that are as demanding as like wrestling, jiu-jitsu. It is so intense. And to be able to do that in your late 30s and in your 40s, like putting garbage in your body, you will not be able to do that. That's not something that's going to create longevity in a sport where you're already probably old to be doing it anyway.
Right.
I'm just kidding. You're not too old to do it.
I feel that sometimes.
Right. But it's like, you cannot, and this is exactly what I deal with on like the daily basis, is like, you cannot, probably the best way to explain it is just like, when I'm in a deficit because I'm getting ready for a comp or something, I'll be like cutting calories slowly because I don't like crashing right before. Every once in a while I'll have to, like, this last couple months ago, I did an IBJJF in Charlotte, and I was like perfectly at weight. Everything was cool. And then my period started and I like put on like 5 pounds, like, and I had to compete the next morning. And I'm like, so I was like out running bleachers and like trying to crash, like get in the sauna and like get out as much water as it was horrible. But that doesn't usually happen because I usually start so early. And so that I can just be in tiny deficit, not a huge deficit, just a tiny deficit. So I lose weight slowly, right? Well, even so, if I'm in a deficit and I'm training as much as I do, almost every time I have gotten like full blown sick right before comp. Like, don't have a voice. Like, ask any of my friends, like, they've ever ran into me at a comp. I usually can't talk because like I've lost my voice. I'm like just getting over, like a couple times it was like bronchitis or whatever. And it's because, your body isn't fueled, you're training and you're not feeding it what it needs to put forth that kind of output. You do that for long enough and it's like, cool, we out. Like, our immune system's done, right? So learning that as like the time has gone on, the one thing that it's really just taught me is like diving into specifically what my body needs for fuel. And when you start getting the hold of that piece, like the fuel piece, like what am I actually doing to like fuel my body for this sport that I love so much? It's less about what tastes good It becomes more about what I need, right?
Right.
So now I know before I go to jiu-jitsu in the morning, I need at least 35 grams of carbs, right? And so typically, I don't want to eat a bunch before I train. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I leave for the gym at 5:30 jiu-jitsu. And I don't feel like shoving a bunch of food in my mouth, nor am I like at 5 a.m. gonna like eat a huge meal and then go and like get thrown around for an hour and a half. Like I'll be sick, right? So it's like I just need dry carbs of some kind that are gonna like be light on my stomach and I can go fuel. Because the word carbohydrate literally is talking about hydration of your muscles. So if your muscles are being fed carbohydrates, they're able to stay hydrated and you'll have more energy, right? So for me, that looks like I eat dried mangoes in the morning, like about 35 grams of carbs before I go to train. And that's really all I need right before. And then when I get home, I crush. I crush like 8 ounces of meat, an egg, 8 ounces of egg whites, and like a bunch of cheese on the top, like a big old breakfast. And as much as like I said, like that fuels my body, like I can't even explain to you the difference in the way that I feel than when I used to like wake up and eat like a chocolate muffin or, a big old bowl of cereal, like, and there's nothing wrong. Some cereals are fine, like whatever. But just for me, I've now found that like I need fuel and I know how much fuel and I know how frequently I need that fuel because I'll start to get like shaky because I'm like, I train. I know what my body needs. Right. So it comes into a place where, yes, aesthetics are one thing. And then there's the fuel piece. And it's like, what are you doing every day? What does your body want to do with the amount of activity and output you're doing? What does it need? Because you can't run on E like for very long. Like it just isn't going to happen. You'll die.
Right. Yeah. So, Alison, as we close out, what final thoughts would you like to leave with our listeners? And then let's close with where our listeners can find you.
Yes. Okay. So, final thoughts. I would say, oh my gosh, eat meat. Definitely crush some beef. No, really, truthfully, I can't say it enough. Women in your 30s, just get some protein in your body. People need to take care of your bodies. Drink water, eat protein, go on long walks, lift heavy weights, try something new. And I promise you, like, you won't be disappointed. I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Alison Capra, Alison Capra, Capra. I also have a website, but that's just where you can find my book. My book's on Amazon as well.
Love it. All right. Thanks so much for your time today, Alison. As we wrap up, let's leave you with some food for thought. In a world where every choice matters, let's approach consumption with mindful intention. Seek knowledge, engage in meaningful conversations, and shape your legacy with purpose. Remember, each moment is an opportunity for growth and impact. So stay inspired and keep fueling your legacy. Thanks for tuning in to Steak Bites.